Open Market is sponsored by AdLib, the self-serve DSP solution making advertising easy. What do the world's largest demand-side platforms have in common? They're effective, but they require large annual contracts and spend minimums. With AdLib, growing agencies get a single platform that connects to every top global DSP with no contracts, no spend minimums, and G2's #1 ranked support. That means access to the entire universe of TV, digital out-of-home, audio, display, video, and native without a hassle and with no blind spots. It's incredibly easy to use, plus it can automate most of the work your team spends hours a day doing manually. Get the most powerful media buying technology without the barriers to entry. Check out AdLib at getadlib.com today.
Welcome to Open Market, a podcast about building companies in the advertising industry. I'm joined today by Eric Franchi and Mathieu Roche, the CEO and founder of ID5. How's it going, man?
Good morning, guys. Great to be here. Going well.
What a pronunciation of the name.
I'm very impressed. I'm like, that's one of the best I've heard from an American. So congrats.
J'ai fait mon doctorat en littérature comparée avec une spécialisation en français.
There you go. You're cheating. That's why. Everybody else knows me than Matthew. That's good.
It's a little slow when it first comes out, but if we jabbered away for a few minutes, it would come back.
Well, let's do a version of that in French next time. You're good at that?
Just to show
Eric looks dazed and confused.
just to show you the difference. I think probably like when I first met you, Mathieu, in 2019, late 2018, I think the first meeting at the end, I was like, can I just call you Matt? And you're like, please do.
Usually that's how the meeting starts. So you were good. You were better than most.
Anyway, and I'm glad that you were not offended. That led to an amazing investment by Ethereum by way of a disclosure. And we've been fans of and partnered with Mathieu ever since. Joe, what are we talking about this week?
Well, I've tentatively entitled this episode Preaching in the Desert. Which was Mathieu's idea about launching a privacy-oriented ad tech startup before privacy was cool. So, Mathieu, why don't we start there, and you can tell us about the founding of ID5 and your time wandering in the wastelands of ad tech.
I wouldn't say privacy ever became cool, but it's certainly more top of mind for a lot of people these days. But back in 2017, when we started ID5, it was definitely not on anybody's radar. So yeah, it was a lot of preaching in the desert, as you say. We started ID5 as in response really to two things. One is GDPR and kind of writing on the wall when it came to regulation. And the second was very, very poor efficiencies around the use of cookies because of matching needs, right? When platforms need to talk to each other, they need to translate, right, to be able to talk each other's languages. And so that's called cookie matching in the ad tech world, which has been less and less, but has been the baseline for everybody's kind of sharing data with each other. And cookie matching, by definition, is an exponential problem, right? If you have, two platforms that have to match cookies with each other, it's two connections, right? One each way. If you have 10 platforms that match cookies, it's 100 connections, and it doesn't get any better. And so the more platform you have, the more complicated it is, which means the lower the match rates. And so when we looked at this problem with my co-founder at the time, we're like, okay, there's got to be a better way, right? Instead of doing end to end, let's do end to one. Everybody matches to one ID. We have like a single currency, a single key that connects everybody. And by the way, from a privacy standpoint, from a data protection standpoint, it's much easier to manage consent, it's much easier to manage opt-outs, much easier to manage transparency, disclosure, all of those things. And at the time, 2017, 2018, cookie deprecation was just like a distant third benefit to what we were doing with ID5 because it was mostly a compliance and an efficiency play. Let me tell you, back then, people didn't want to hear it. There was a lot of, with a handful of like early adopters, people are going to show things that we probably didn't see ourselves, right? People like, well, Joe and Eric, Joe Zawadzki at MediaMath, Eric, people like Kasper Scout, Samazio was one of the first guys who said like, I've been waiting for you when I came to see him. Like, okay. But yeah, it was very much, we've been working with cookie matching and like poor match rates forever. And like, we just, do more cookie matching, right? Like eventually it will solve itself out or whatever. So, and privacy was still a very distant a very distant issue. So yeah, there was a lot of preaching in the desert, which in retrospect, I think allowed us to establish a position to kind of gain respect to some extent because when what you're saying becomes true eventually, people are like, oh, hold on. I read this thing that you said like 2 years ago, right? And now it helps with the awareness, with the image of the company as a bit of an innovator in the space.
Yeah, well, I think what's been remarkable about ID5 from the outsider's perspective, this is the first time we're meeting for everyone's sake, so it's not like I have the insider's view, is that it seems like in the alternative ID space, which we can also talk about whether you like that term, you guys are really often mentioned right alongside like Ramp ID and UID2. And, the Trade Desk, obviously the largest independent company in our industry. LiveRamp, has like a $1.7 billion market cap or something. And then you're like this, little startup coming out of Europe. So it's like, how did you do that?
Yeah. John Triscari once wrote on his Quo Vadis newsletter that we are the little engine that could. That cultural reference could escape me, but I like the image. How do we do that? I think, being early is as bad as being late, unless you become right at some point. And I think like those 2-3 years preaching in the desert before basically what changed our world is Google coming out and say, okay, we're going to remove third-party cookies and Chrome, right? But we hadn't been there in market for 3 years saying like, hey, we need a universal identifier. We need a better way to do things. Cookies aren't going to cut it. They're not good enough. And so kind of people noticed. So we were very early there and we were one of the obvious choice. I think the other big difference is the neutrality that we have, right? We're not involved like both LiveRamp and I have tremendous respect for LiveRamp and Trade Desk, but they're not ID providers. They're media or data companies. They do that because it benefits their core business. And so there's always a question of like, well, from a publisher standpoint, for instance, or from a brand standpoint, well, is it in my best interest to use their ID solution or is it in their best interest, right? And I don't think people ask that of ID5 because we don't have another business. Like this is what we do. And we're proud. I totally, sign on the alternative ID definition where I think we're more of an ID company than an identity company, to be honest. And we can talk about what differences I mean by that. But yeah, we're in the business of building IDs so that they can be involved in transactions, advertising transactions by buyers and sellers. And that's the only thing we do, which means that our interest is 100% aligned with that our clients who want to have stable, reliable, long-term, IDs to power their algorithm, their businesses. So that alignment of interest, I think, went a long way. The clarity of what we do, the one trick pony nest of what we do, right? It's just one thing. We just built an ID framework to power investing transaction. That's it. Nothing else. Right? We don't make money as an ad network. We don't sell data. We don't know anything about users. We just power this. We build this infrastructure to power this ecosystem. That's it. I think the market kind of values that clarity.
Yeah, for sure. With this podcast, Open Market, like we tend to look at things from the lens of the lessons we learn from some of these stories around go to market. So what was the moment, or what was maybe the catalyst, I don't want to put words in your mouth, of when everything changed and all of a sudden things clicked? ID5 was now on the lips of many more people, maybe not the entire industry the way it is today, but like on many more people. What was that moment, if you could think back?
There's two key dates, I think. One is, I want to say June 2019, when Prebid released the ID modules, so the ability for ID vendors like us to allow publishers to turn on the ID5 service in their Prebid wrapper. Because all of a sudden it was just like super simple, 2 clicks, sign a contract, boom, you're gone. You're live, right? You've got ID5 IDs coming and kind of passed in your bid request. From a product standpoint, that was really a critical moment. And the second one, from an awareness standpoint, a talking point standpoint, right? People started talking about alternative IDs, and so ID5 is one of the main players. Google's announcement in Feb 2020. Actually, let me add a third date. I think a third date would be related to Sincera releasing their ranking of adoption of IDs by publishers that showed that we were 2 to 3x bigger than the big players that you mentioned in terms of publisher adoption. Like those 3 data points, really massive, were like, each of them were like significant in the awareness, the visibility of the company.
What did you do with them, those data points, right? Because like, I think every company, here's the question, has perhaps these moments where either they become transformational to the company or it's a miss, right? So, and I can also think back and I remember those moments What did you do to capitalize on the market moving in your direction?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think one of our core value is collaboration, in particular with our clients. And we always want other people to talk about us because we're an infrastructure, right? So you don't our job is to make sure train arrive on time. You don't talk about train that arrive on time. So we've always kind of put our plans forward. We do a lot of business cases. We try to get people on stage to say, hey, this is the future. This is how we're working, right? And I think in this case, the fact that it's not us saying, we're a great solution to complement cookies or replace cookies, but it's Sincera showing numbers of adoption and all of those publishers believing in us. It's more powerful when other people talk about you. And so having other people talk about us, whether it's in journalistic interviews or whatever, and so encouraging them. And the thing about ID5 is there is a lot of goodwill behind the company. We have a lot of supporters in a way because people want to see something succeed, right? Not necessarily ID5, but they know that we need something better than cookies. They know that cookies are not good enough. They're going to be disappearing. What Google is coming up with Privacy Sandbox is definitely not going to cut it. So we need something else. And when they look at what's available, they're like, well, this little company seems that they're doing okay. And, they've got the right, values and the right kind of mindset and the right element of interest. So let's push them. We have a lot of that. We have a lot of supporters who are pushing us forward or talking about us. And we're trying to encourage that. And I think that's been quite successful for us to have other people talk about us like that.
That's fascinating because Joe, I'm sure he's going to want to kick in right now, has a framework and a belief of, the company and the CEO going direct to the audience. Your model has been a little bit different where you've got other companies talking about you to audiences.
Yeah, I think, Mathieu's, your own account of your company's success is definitely suggestive of humble founder syndrome. I think marketers would probably put it a little differently. I mean, what I'm hearing is because we have to brag about the company, that's part of our job. But I think it's really, it seems like the biggest factors are clarity, knowing who you are and what you stand for. That makes a big difference. Timing. So being early, right? Not being the 8th alternative idea on the market, but being one of the first ones. And then exogenous events. So it's not really an easily replicable formula because you really, I think the biggest, those two things that were under your control were seeing where the market was heading way before other people were ready to go in on this, which is hard to replicate. Obviously, every founder tries to do that and every VC tries to bet on founders who are doing that, but there's no formula for that because it's based on an analysis of a specific problem. And then again, that clarity that, the company's literally named ID5. Couldn't be better for where the market ended up heading. Yeah, you knew what you were doing. And so in 2020, when that bomb hits and, 2 years after GDPR, when Google is going to deprecate cookies and everyone's looking for alternative IDs, well, there's this company called ID5. They've already been working on this. You had made some inroads, which was probably driven by, founder-led sales and all of the things they usually get an ad tech company off the ground. And then, that exogenous event takes you away because once you're in that consideration set and you're just one of those 3 IDs that everyone's naming, again, it's Ramp ID, UID2, ID5, then you have a lot of momentum. I don't know. How does that account hit you? Does that resonate?
Yeah, 100%. There's, Galloway has a say where you always take credit for your success and you deflect blame for your failure, while in reality a lot of it is luck. Right? We just been lucky. We saw things just a bit before other people. But the time when we launched, Brian O'Kelly and LiveRamp and Andrew Casale were building the advertising ID consortium. That didn't go anywhere. But I was like, oh shit, is this gonna be a problem for us, right? And then at the time you had DigiTrust as well, right, which was also kind of an early attempt of having an industry kind of standardized ID. So it's not like we saw it first. I'm convinced innovation is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration, right? You gotta keep at it. You gotta keep going and keep going and keep going. And if you're gonna die, at least die with your ideas, and not try to kind of pivot and shift and take other people's ideas and try this and try that. No, just keep going, right? That's point to clarity. I agree with you. This is super important. Also, we're in a very complicated market, and identity in particular is a complicated layer. It's like an infrastructure layer, right? So it's not the fancy thing. It's not the interface that people see. It's not like the the functionality that people understand. It's a means to an end. It's a capability within a bigger platform that's going to do like audience targeting or frequency capping or measurement or whatever, which is what people are interested about. We're just a component of this. Where we've got ID5 inside is a bit of our the tagline. It's like Intel inside, right? The CPU is super important. Nobody knows what the CPU does and like where it is in the computer. It's just there. But it's critical. If you don't have a CPU, you don't have a computer, right? Same with identity. If you don't have an identity framework, you don't have means to recognize people and devices, well, you just can't run anything. Like advertising works on user level interactions. You have to be able to recognize users. So clarity is critical for that. And like that banging that drum of like always saying the same thing and kind of over and over again. I mean, my wife and I share an office at home. Like she must be crazy listening to me saying the same time over and over again by now. But it's the only way it works because it's such a complicated market. I think that's in your power. That's something that you can control as a founder, right? Chose to do less, but do it better. And it's also, I know we're going to talk about scale up. Like this is the only way to scale, right? If you're going to do like white glove service, you can do it for 5 clients. You want to serve 5,000 clients, you're going to do, super standardized, like simple, replicable business processes. So I think clarity is really, and that's something I learned kind of the hard way because in previous life, I experienced trying to be everything to everybody, and that doesn't work. Like I've got those scars, and I'm like, now we're going to be one thing and one thing only. And if we got it wrong, well, let's see if we can pivot and adapt. But like, it's just too difficult to launch a business, let alone launching 10 business in one. Like it's impossible.
Speaking of scaling, one of the things that ID5 did well, and I think is a standout versus perhaps other companies that were founded in Europe was a successful U.S. launch and building a successful U.S. presence. It's interesting, like one of the biggest questions that I hear from founders that come out of Europe is how do you do it, and how did ID5 do it? What are some of your lessons and maybe recommendations for founders that want to build a U.S. presence?
Yeah, it's super difficult. It's a huge market. Yeah, you got to be everywhere. What made us a bit different is that we're not selling to brands and agencies. We're selling to tech companies. Tech companies are more international, kind of in their approach, right? And also we try to be American from day one. We try to kind of build this muscle. I mean, up to a point where we started to put the Z instead of S's in our words, right? Just to kind of Americanize the narrative. We recruited our first people on the ground as soon as we raised our A round, right? That was like, because, well, 2 things. First, the ad tech market and the MarTech market that we support is mostly US centric. Most of the big companies, right? You take the big DSPs, big data platforms, big SSPs, they're all US centric, and their product people, their tech people that we have to convince to work with us are all based in the US. So like this, that's not like we had a choice. We took the best from Europe, which is kind of privacy awareness, right? Privacy concepts, data protection concepts, and then embedded that in the product, and then went to market in the US saying like, we've got you covered for the next 10 years, don't worry, right? But we're an American company. Like that's one thing. One guy once told me like, you work at ID5, that's great. What'd you do? I'm like, well, I'm the founder. I'm like, oh, you get out of here. ID5 is an American company, right? Like, well, thank you, but no. So I think it's a lot of that is like, you have to be perceived. Understandably, people want to work with like local people that they know will be supportive and stuff. And like, so you have to have people on the ground. You have to be there. Like I'm in Orlando right now, not because I love the place, but because I have to be there. I have to, and I spend, a lot of my time in the US and most of our commercial teams in the US, because you have to be local, you have to be present, you have to be on the ground. And when you sell to agencies, that's difficult because there's a lot of ground to cover. So it's a very, very big investment. We sell mostly to tech companies, which means we can do that. Well, we can do a lot of that remotely, and we can do a lot of that with less people on the ground. So that's a more affordable market entry.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is it's partially an attitude thing, right? Of being a global company or being an American company from day one. Then it's also a who, not how type thing, right? It's like finding the people who know that market, especially if you're selling, I think, to brands and agencies. Like you can't do it if you're just like trying to bridge the chasm from across the ocean. You need local people who understand that market. The only other thing I'll add is that I love when I talk to early stage founders who are selling to tech companies. I think it's the easiest market to reach. Like, there are a lot of the influencers in like ad tech, and I don't just mean like, people who yap for a living like me. I also mean just like founders, CEOs, like the people who make decisions. They're hanging out on like Twitter or LinkedIn. Like, they're easier to find than like the agency decision maker at Publicis who's in like this vast bureaucracy and like also doesn't want to get pitched by 700 ad tech companies.
And everybody's going after them, right? Like we're pitching Adam Soroka at Magnite, right? I don't think he's getting 100 pitch emails every month. We're pitching, like that's the kind of guy that we're going after, which are a lot less in demand, which means it's easier for us to kind of stand out of the crowd. But yeah, global like mindset, I think, is super important, right? You've got to have that ambition to be like a global company from day one, even if you're just 10 people, which was we kind of got helped in a way by COVID because people didn't expect us to come to see them anymore, right? And that's when we really took off, and like that's when we grew our presence in the US because we could reach out to them where we did like 7 a.m. calls or 10 p.m. calls with like publishers in on the West Coast, publishers in Australia and Japan. They didn't expect us to come see them. So like we could be as big as we, or as small as we wanted, didn't matter, right? And that global mindset was really really important, I think, in establishing us as a potentially future global company.
So I often say that marketing problems tend to fall into one of three buckets: awareness, differentiation, or urgency. Of those three, if any of them resonate with you, what do you feel like your most urgent marketing challenges are, and how are you tackling them at the moment?
I think the most difficult to tackle is urgency. I don't believe in scaremongering. I don't believe in kind of, scaring people that this is the end of the world and they should do something about it right now. But it feels sometimes, especially in our case, where we're building a better way to do things. The question is, well, how much better, and like, is it worth the investment now, or should I wait until my current system, i.e. cookies and mobile ad IDs and IP addresses, fully go away, like I've got my back to the wall to actually do something about it, right? And so I think urgency is the most difficult one to influence because it's mostly exogenous factors. It's external, it's Google Chrome, right? It's like what was going to happen with cookies. It's regulation. When is it going to pass? Those are the type of things that are external factors that have massive impact on our clients' decision to invest or not, especially in the early days. Now it's getting easier and easier because there's a huge network effect to what we do, right? And the more publishers use us, the more SSPs pass ID5 IDs in bid requests, the more buyers see ID5 IDs in bid requests, in addition to or as a complement to other things they have, or like unique, bringing them more unique coverage. Like, it's making our life easier. And then the more buying we have on ID5 IDs, the more interesting it becomes for publishers. And so that acceleration effect is really strong now. But in the early days, it's difficult to get people to move and to be early adopters, first movers into a system like that. So that's where urgency becomes a really critical factor. And it's difficult to influence urgency. Awareness, you can influence, right? You can do marketing, you can talk about your company, you can do that. But urgency is differentiation. That's going to be product marketing. Urgency is very difficult. So I think that's the one that we're struggling with the most.
Joe, how do you create urgency when, the factors that might affect that urgency are out of your hands?
Yeah, I think part of it is having a message that takes into account potential changes in the market. So, for example, a lot of people were all in on cookieless, and they were almost boiling down the privacy issue to that one company, i.e. Google's decision making. And that's a bit of a strategic error, right? Like, you can talk about cookieless, obviously, but you want to be talking about privacy as a more holistic issue and alternative IDs as something that's going to help you no matter what, given, GDPR, Apple's privacy changes, et cetera. So that's one thing I've seen, is like taking a holistic view of the market. I think, as I'm always want to argue, evangelism doesn't hurt, right? Like when you're a CEO because these things overlap, right? So from an awareness perspective, if you're a CEO and you're out there talking about your solution all the time, talking about issues in the industry, talking about the results you're driving for your partners, that is going to make what you're doing feel urgent, because your potential customers are going to see what their peers are doing, and they're going to think, all right, well, if I'm Magnite and PubMatic is leaning into this with ID5 and it's driving results for them, maybe I should be looking at it too. So it's partially like inducing envy. I would say those are a couple things, is like in terms of the messaging and positioning, making it feel inevitable despite what any one company might do externally. And then in terms of distribution, being really present and leveraging the success stories that you have, which isn't just a matter of, say, case studies, which are typical, but also like being on social or having your own owned content, email, audio, whatever, finding forums where you can speak to the results you're driving, especially for something like ID5, which I think alternative IDs can be a little intangible to people, right? Like DSPs, SSPs, we all know what they do. Alternative IDs, it's not always as obvious. So I think telling that story frequently is important.
I totally agree with you. What you're saying, that the issue with face is that the whole echo chamber simplifies it down to cookieless, right? We've been talking about data compliance, data protection, right? Compliance. We've been talking about efficiencies. We've been talking about stable kind of infrastructure on top of like all of those things. And the fact that, yes, it replaces cookies or it complements cookies, but it's not the only thing we do. But that's the only thing the market hears. It's one of the buzzwords, right? It's one of the buzzwords, and the market kind of hones in onto buzzwords like, oh, you're in this space. Okay, great. And similarly, when Google says, oh, actually, I'm going to push this deadline by 2 years, like, oh, okay, so this space doesn't exist anymore, so you guys are worthless. Well, we weren't the greatest thing, right, since
sliced bread.
Since sliced bread yesterday. We're not useless today. The world doesn't change that much, but the media circuit changes that fast. The social media changes that fast, right? So it's difficult to kind of be counter rhythm in that effect, right? And to try to maintain that, like, no, it's not just the one thing. It's all three things, and all three things are important. Maybe you guys just want to talk about that one, but don't forget about the other two, because that gives you the stability over time. Because when people are talking about federal data privacy law in the US, all of a sudden, oh, privacy, data compliance become really important, and then you forget about the cookieless argument. Well, yes, but like it's still there, right? And then again, when cookie kind of don't go away anymore as a one-off, but like, slowly over time, like, oh, well, then cookieless, no, it's still there. So maintaining that narrative is really, really important.
Yeah, on the one hand, I hear you, and the distortionary effect of perception is a challenge. On the other hand, that means you have an opportunity to go against the grain. And whenever you can go against the grain, you can potentially drive attention and shift the conversation, right? So like when I work with a founder like you, I'm always looking for what are most people getting wrong about our space, right? And so something that people might have been getting wrong for years was over-indexing on cookies as the ultimate arbiter of privacy changes, right? And that's then a talk track you can leverage to become the privacy guy who's reminding everyone it's not just about cookies and here's why, and etc.
Yes, and we're trying to be that. Like we try to be the identity guy back when identity wasn't kind of popular, but it's difficult to go against, like, it's, David versus Goliath, and like in this case, I'm not betting on David, because like the narrative, like the whole, like, dozens of journalists and like podcasts and like, it's just the narrative is like the narrative right now that we have to go against is brands should make the decision on which alternative IDs to choose. And I'm like, no, it doesn't make any sense. Like it's an enabler. It's a component of a bigger thing. Like brands want something that works, right? And that is efficient, that reaches their consumers, and that isn't presenting any kind of, compliance issue. That's it. They don't care if it's an ID5, an ID6, an ID7 or what have you. Like it's just a means to an end. But the market is like, oh, we're agnostic. We'll do whatever our clients tell us. The clients don't have a clue. It's like when you buy a car, there's a set of wheels that come with the car, right? You're not challenging, oh, why did you choose those tires versus those tires? It's just it's a means to an end, right? It's part of the package. Brands want to reach their audience. They want to optimize the frequency of messaging. They want to measure the performance of their campaign, make sure they're getting ROAS. That's what they want. That's what they care about. How this is done, maybe, 1% of them will be interested and equipped to understand. 99% will just trust their DSP to make the best choice, right? Like you trust your car manufacturer to mount a set of wheels that will work, that will be kind of in line with the performance expectations that will have good kind of fuel efficiencies or energy efficiencies. But that narrative is super difficult to push back against, because this is the generally kind of accepted, understanding. Like people say, oh, well, we'll see what agencies and what brands want to use. No, but it's an uphill battle to get that message across. Believe me.
ID5 is, correct me if I'm wrong, like a remote first or a remote only org, right?
Remote first. That's what we call it. Yeah.
Remote first. Okay. More recently, there's been a shift in sentiment around remote work. Amazon has been in the news over the course of the past couple of weeks because they basically said everybody's going back to work 5 days a week, or don't come back, or you'll be asked not to come back. Has your thoughts, especially just given the past 5 years or so, has your thoughts around remote first changed or evolved at all, or do you disagree with some of the current sentiment?
I mean, I think every company's culture and operating mode is different. We chose. When we started the company, I was in London. My two co-founders were in Paris. Like, we already had 500 kilometers between us anyway. We were not in the same office. We hired our first people in London. We kind of set up most of the team in London, but then COVID happened. Everybody kind of just went back home, and my marketing director was Italian. She went back to Italy because her family. We hired our CTO in Germany. And we said, well, let's make the best of it. Like, there's a lot of advantages for us to be remote because we can hire talent wherever they are. So our recruitment pool is not just the London metro area or the New York metro area. It's the entire Europe and the Eastern and Central time zone in the US, right? Now we're 60 people. We're in 15 or 16 different countries. So there's no going back. We're not going to ask people to go back. Like, there's no office. Right? We have offices because people like to be together sometimes. So we have an office in London, we have an office in New York, we have an office in Krakow, Poland, where we have enough people to kind of justify having a place for them to go and kind of spend time together. But most often, they're not in the same teams anyway. So they'll be working together in person, right? Everything we do is remote by design, right? By default. Information sharing, systems, collaboration systems, all of that is designed to be operated on a remote scale. And then we do a lot of in-person events. So we do every 4 months, we have a company offsite. We take everybody to a nice destination. We spend 3-4 days together. We have fun. We work. We strategize. We brainstorm. We build the culture of the company. We build a team. And it's a very, very useful week to kind of build those connections. But then we work, thousands of kilometers away from each other. And it's working really well. And I understand that other people, I think hybrid doesn't work. You can't be half in, half out. You have to be all in or all out, right? I think hybrid, in which you can come 2 or 3 days a week whenever you want, but then you're there, your teammates are not there. It's just a mess. And then you're not really set up for sharing information, storing data, rewrite a lot, right? Because that's how we operate as a company, right? Because I need to be able to kind of go see what meeting report happened and so it's a different culture. It's a different organization model. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I think it works well for us, but we're a 60 people company. We have the budgets that we have. And so if we can hire great engineers in remote locations, they'll probably be cheaper. So that works out works out well for us. If we can hire people that are happy to be remote, they'll be more loyal. We very rarely have people resign, very rarely. So I think that there is a lot of benefits for a company of our size, for a company doing what we do, operating at the scale that we operate at. You cannot build team, you cannot build culture remotely. You have to have in-person moments. So you have to find that balance. But I think you should write the right balance. If you're remote first, you build for remote. And then you allow people to get together once in a while. You can force them to get together, if often enough, so that they build those connections, they build those rapport. I think we find a pretty good balance. And you know what? If there are Amazon engineers and product people that are looking for a remote environment, call me. It's more for us.
Makes perfect sense. Joe, what you got?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think if I had to choose, I would be a partisan of remote first. I like that term. I think it is an unbelievable opportunity to be able to hire people from anywhere, to be able to collaborate with people from anywhere. And for people who are really productive, I think remote is better on an individual basis. I went to One World Trade yesterday to meet with a client, and it's great to be in person with them. But I'm losing so much productivity out of my workday when I'm just like in the commute. Even that the hour and a half you spend commuting, I'm on the subway and I'm like annoyed because I can't send an email. And so I don't know. I think for the average person, maybe it doesn't make a huge difference. But if you're the type of for your most productive people who are like firing away and they're just like going, like just being comfortable at home and just like having complete access to your technology and no distractions and whatever. I don't know. I think it's super valuable, but I do think there's a very different energy in the room when you get in person, and that is valuable and you don't want to lose it. So even if it's remote first, so that you can take advantage of all those productivity gains, the ability to hire people from wherever, I agree, Mathieu, that you do need the opportunity to get together on a regular basis to build those connections.
But from a cultural standpoint, from a team building standpoint, just you need to know the people you're going to work with, right? You need to know if they have kids, what they like what they are like in person, right? How do they party and stuff like this is important as part of that social fabric of the company. And there are lots of constraints, right? Like working remotely, working from home doesn't mean working in your pajamas on your couch with your laptop on your laps. No. You've got to have an office. You've got to have like a proper desk, a second screen. You've got to have like headphones. It means probably hiring people a bit more senior, a bit more autonomous, a bit more independent, right? You hire like 25-year-old kids. It's difficult because they need the social life. They need so there's constraints, right? You need to write a lot more. You need to build. I mean, we've deployed OKRs when we were 30. I'm not saying it's been a success, but like we went that far into kind of making sure everybody was aligned, knew what we were doing, why we're doing it, and break it down. So there's a lot of constraints. But I think the benefits are clearly outweigh the constraints in terms of efficiencies, as you say. Like I've got literally a 10-meter commute from my bedroom to my desk, right? That's like I can be on calls at 8 a.m. and finish at 8 p.m, and that's it. And I don't have the 30 minutes commute into London every day, back and forth. That's an hour of my time. There's lots of benefits. The comfort, the freedom of cooking for your kids in the evening, right? Like being there, and like all of that is very valuable. And you have to factor that into the whole culture, the whole kind of experience you're building for your employees, and that's something that's valuable. And again, if you find the right balance, I think it's worth it.
I can attest to Mathieu's evening communication schedule. This has been great. Thank you, guys. Mathieu, where can people learn more about ID5 and hear more from you?
LinkedIn is always a good place. We put a lot of things. Our company profile is ID5.io. They'll find me as well connected there. And any good industry events, you're likely going to bump into me or someone from the team. So don't be a stranger. Come and say hi and have a chat. And we're always happy to to evangelize, as you said, Joe. So it's an important mission, I think, that we're trying to achieve. And we're looking forward to more discussions and more discussions like that. That was great. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mathieu. Subscribe, find us on Twitter and LinkedIn, yell at us in the digital public square, as I like to say. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.